The desert night smelled like cordite and fear. 17-year-old Reagan Frost lay motionless in her hide 200 meters from the Kuwaiti border checkpoint. Sand pressed against her cheek. The M40A1 sniper rifle felt heavier than it should, but her father had taught her that weight was just another variable to master, like wind or distance, or the tremor in her hands that came from being old enough to kill, but too young to vote. Through the scope, she counted 8 Iraqi soldiers moving through the checkpoint ruins. They moved with the confidence of men who believed the war was ending, that the Americans were pulling back, that this stretch of desert belonged to them again. They were wrong on all 3 counts. 300 meters beyond the checkpoint, 6 United States Marines lay pinned behind a burned-out M1 Abrams tank. The friendly fire incident had happened 40 minutes ago, and A-10 Warthog had mistaken their position for enemy armor in the smoke and confusion. The cannon fire had torn through their Humvee, killed their driver, wounded 3 others. Now they were trapped, bleeding out in the sand, while Iraqi forces closed the net. Reagan's radio crackled. The voice was American rough with pain and sand. "Angel, this is Viper 6. We've got maybe 10 minutes before we're overrun. 3 wounded, can't move. If you've got a miracle in that rifle, now would be the time." She recognized the voice. Corporal Declan Hartley, 31 years old, Force Recon Marine. Her father had worked with him during the El Salvador operation 6 years ago, back when Reagan was learning algebra and her father was teaching death. Reagan keyed her radio once. No words, just acknowledgement. Her father's voice played in her memory like a recording worn smooth by repetition. Patience beats aggression every time. Let them think they've won, then take that belief away. The first Iraqi soldier stepped into her crosshairs at 0237 hours. Reagan exhaled slowly, let her heartbeat settle into the rhythm her father had drilled into her since she was 12 years old. 60 beats per minute, 45 on a good day. The rifle was an extension of her nervous system, now no different than her hands or her breath. She squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The sound carried across the desert like thunder announcing judgment. The soldier dropped without a sound, a red mist where his head had been. The others scattered, confusion spreading like wildfire. They didn't know where the shot had come from. The night swallowed sound, and distance made the invisible sniper into something supernatural. Reagan worked the bolt, smooth, mechanical, emotionless. The second shot took the radio man as he reached for his handset. Center mass, 620 meters. He crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. The third shot killed the man trying to drag the radio man's body to cover. Headshot, 580 meters. The mathematics of violence reduced to windage and elevation. Now they knew the direction. 3 soldiers opened fire with AK-47s, spraying rounds toward the ridgeline, where Reagan's muzzle flash had betrayed her position. But they were shooting at shadows and assumptions. She'd already shifted 15 meters to her secondary position, moving through the sand like water, the way her father had taught her to flow between hides without disturbing the desert's natural rhythms. The fourth shot punched through the chest of the man carrying the RPG. The rocket launcher fell from his hands unfired. Reagan tracked it falling in slow motion through her scope, watched it hit the sand, watched the remaining soldiers realize they'd lost their only heavy weapon. They broke. Panic was contagious in combat. Reagan had learned that in training, shooting targets that bled red paint and fell down when you hit them right. But this was different. This was watching human beings make the calculation between fighting and surviving, watching them choose survival and turn to run. She gave them no mercy. The fifth shot took a fleeing soldier in the back at 720 meters. He went down hard, screaming. The scream carried across the desert, high and terrible. The sixth shot silenced him. The remaining 2 soldiers made it almost 50 meters before Reagan's 7th and 8th shots ended their retreat. Both headshots, both clean, both permanent. Silence returned to the desert like a guest who'd never really left. Reagan stayed in her hide for another 90 seconds, scanning for additional threats. Her training demanded that Mom, Ghost Frost, her father, had beaten that discipline into her over 5 years of desert training in Arizona. Never assume the job is finished. Dead men have killed the careless. The radio crackled again. "Angel, this is Viper 6. Hostile contact eliminated." Jesus Christ. 8 targets, 8 kills. Who the hell are you? Reagan didn't answer. She broke down her hide with practiced efficiency, erasing evidence of her presence. The M40A1 went into its drag bag. The empty brass casings went into her pocket. Even her body's impression in the sand got smoothed away with a dead branch. She moved toward the checkpoint like a ghost keeping an appointment with the living. The Marines had dragged their wounded behind the tank's hulk. Reagan approached from the east, staying low, her movements economical. She'd learned long ago that wasted motion was just another way to get killed. Hartley saw her first. He was applying pressure to another Marine's chest wound with hands that trembled from blood loss and adrenaline depletion. His right leg was torn up from shrapnel field dressing, already soaked through. He stared at Reagan like she was a hallucination, something the desert heat and blood loss had conjured. "You're a kid." Reagan knelt beside the wounded Marine without responding. Sergeant Marcus Brennan, 26 years old, sucking chest wound, the kind that killed you in stages if you didn't know what you were doing. She knew what she was doing. Her aid bag came out smooth and fast, chest seal, hemostatic gauze, pressure bandages. The supplies were civilian-grade, nothing military issue. Her father had told her that deniable assets didn't carry anything that could trace back to the American government. "You're just a kid," Hartley said again. His voice carried shock wrapped in disbelief. Reagan worked without speaking. She cleaned the wound, applied the chest seal during Brennan's exhalation, checked for tension, pneumothorax. The Marine's breathing was labored but stable. He'd live if they got him to a field hospital in the next 2 hours. "What's your name?" Hartley asked. Reagan looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Her eyes were gray like winter storms old beyond their 17 years. Then she went back to treating Brennan's wound. "They call her Angel," one of the other Marines said. He was applying a tourniquet to his own leg with shaking hands. "I heard the officers talking. CIA asset off the books. She's not supposed to exist." "Angels are supposed to have wings," Hartley said. His words were starting to slur. Blood loss and shock making decisions his brain couldn't override. "You're just a kid with a rifle." Reagan finished treating Brennan and moved to Hartley. His leg wound was worse than he'd admitted. The shrapnel had torn through the femoral region, missed the artery by maybe 2 centimeters. Luck and anatomy were the only reasons he wasn't already dead. She worked fast, cleaned the wound, packed it with combat gauze, applied pressure until the bleeding slowed to something manageable. "Your father teach you that?" Hartley asked. His eyes were starting to glaze. Reagan met his gaze again. "Everything." It was the only word she spoke that night. The medevac helicopter arrived 13 minutes later. The distinctive thump of rotor blades cutting through desert air sounded like salvation, arriving late but arriving nonetheless. Reagan helped load the wounded Marines onto the bird, her movements efficient and forgettable. As the helicopter lifted off, Hartley reached out, grabbed her wrist with what remained of his strength. "Thank you, Angel." Reagan pulled free without responding. She watched the helicopter disappear into the night sky carrying 6 Marines who would live to see morning because she'd been patient enough to let 8 men die. By the time the sun rose over Kuwait, she was gone. No footprints. No evidence. Just another ghost story the Marines would tell each other over beers years later, wondering if she'd been real or just something the desert had dreamed up to balance the scales. The after-action report classified the engagement as hostile contact, 8 enemy, KYA 0 friendly casualties. There was no mention of Angel, no mention of the 17-year-old girl who'd killed 8 men before she was old enough to buy cigarettes. Reagan Frost disappeared back into the cover story her father had built for her, just another contractor's daughter, living on the military installation, invisible in plain sight. 3 months later, the official notification arrived at the Frost residence in Kingman, Arizona. William Ghost Frost, civilian contractor, killed in action during classified operations in Kuwait. Body unrecoverable. Condolences from a grateful nation. Reagan read the notification twice, then filed it in the box with all the other lies her father had told to keep her safe. She knew he wasn't dead. The notification was just another layer of cover, another piece of the story they'd built together. Ghost Frost had taught her that the best way to disappear was to die publicly and live privately. But she wouldn't see him again for 33 years. And when she finally did, he wouldn't remember who she was. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, August 2024, the enlisted mess hall smelled like industrial cleaning solution, fighting a losing battle against decades of accumulated grease and the particular desperation of government-issue food trying to pass for nutrition. Reagan Frost sat alone at a corner table, back to the wall, eyes tracking every entrance and exit without appearing to track anything at all. 29 years old now. Lean and wire-tight with sun-darkened skin that spoke of deployments to places where shade was a luxury and air conditioning was something you remembered from before. Her Navy working uniform Type 3 digital pattern marked her as something other than Marina Squid among jarheads perpetually out of place in spaces the Marines considered their exclusive territory. The dive watch on her left wrist had a crystal so scratched it was nearly opaque. She'd worn it in Kuwait when she was 17, worn it in Somalia when she was 19, Worn it in Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen. Worn it through 12 years of operations that didn't officially exist in places the American government would deny with a straight face if anyone ever asked. The watch kept perfect time. That was all that mattered. Reagan ate mechanically. Fork to mouth, chew, swallow, repeat. Food was fuel. The baked chicken was dry. The green beans were overcooked. The rice was institutional white, the kind that had no flavor and made no apologies for its existence. She ate it anyway because the body demanded calories, and the mission didn't stop for preferences. She'd been at Camp Lejeune for 2 months, liaison assignment with the G2 intelligence shop. The kind of posting that existed on paper but meant nothing in practice. A placeholder position for operators who needed to disappear from the forward edge for a while to decompress or break down or remember what it felt like to sleep without a rifle within arm's reach. Reagan wasn't decompressing. She was barely holding together. Lieutenant Ash Sullivan's death had happened 8 months ago. Ramadi, routine convoy, IED on a road that had been swept twice that morning. The kind of death that seemed insignificant compared to the 72 hours they'd survived together in Helmand 3 years earlier, pinned down in a compound that should have been their tomb. The promise she'd made him still echoed like a recording she couldn't stop playing. If we make it out of this, I'll stop being a weapon. I'll try to be human again. They'd made it out. She'd kept half the promise. Stopped being a weapon. But being human was harder than she'd expected. Turned out you couldn't just flip a switch and rewire 12 years of training that had made threat assessment and violence calculation into unconscious reflexes. The mess hall was loud, silverware scraping plates, conversations overlapping in that peculiar military white noise, boots scuffing on floors that never looked clean no matter how much bleach got poured on them. 173 people in the space. Reagan had counted them without thinking about counting them. 47 Marines, 18 sailors, 3 civilian contractors. The rest were a mix she'd categorized and dismissed as non-threats within the first 30 seconds of entering. She was on her second bite of chicken when Corporal Cole Brennan decided to make her his problem. Reagan saw him coming, 24 years old, 6'1", maybe 215 pounds of gym muscle packed onto a frame that moved with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never been truly tested. High and tight fade haircuts sharp enough to cut paper, jaw clenched like he was perpetually biting down on something that tasted like disappointment. 2 other Marines flanked him, Wade and Garrett, both lance corporals, both followers looking for someone to tell them they mattered. Reagan's hands kept moving, fork to mouth, mechanical. But her pupils dilated and contracted in the space of a single breath, her nervous system making calculations her conscious mind didn't need to acknowledge. Brennan's approach vector, 3 meters and closing, right hand clenched, left loose, weight favoring his right leg. Probably an old football injury, the knee that never quite healed right. Distance to exits, primary 12 meters northeast, secondary 8 meters southwest, tertiary kitchen service entrance 6 meters east but through obstacle terrain, improvised weapons within reach. Fork tines up, tray edge aluminum composite sharp if swung correctly. Water glass heavy bottom, effective bludgeon, or if broken a cutting implement. Chair leg if separated from base 22 inches of leverage. All of this processing happened in less than 2 seconds. Muscle memory written so deep that conscious thought never entered the equation. Brennan stopped beside her table. His shadow fell across her tray like an accusation. Squid. Reagan didn't look up. She took another bite of chicken, chewed, swallowed. I'm talking to you. She set her fork down with deliberate care. Looked up at him with eyes that showed nothing. Not fear, not anger, just evaluation. Clinical and cold. Brennan's jaw clenched tighter. He'd been expecting something, tears maybe, submission, some acknowledgement that he mattered, that his presence demanded response. Navy doesn't belong in Marine mess halls, he said, loud enough that conversations started dying around them, loud enough that heads turned, loud enough that this was about audience now, about performance, about proving something to the room that Brennan needed, proven more than Reagan needed to breathe. Reagan held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, not long enough to be a challenge, not short enough to be fear, just long enough to make the assessment her training demanded. Threat level minimal, emotional response high, tactical capability low, probability of escalation 93%. She started to stand to remove herself from the situation before it became something that required official reporting and official responses. Brennan's hand hit her shoulder hard. Open palm strike full force meant to drive her back down into the chair, or send her stumbling forward into the table. Reagan's tray clattered to the floor. Baked chicken scattered. Green beans rolled across linoleum worn smooth by decades of boots and broken men. White rice spread in a fan pattern that some part of her brain registered as matching the dispersion pattern of buckshot at 7 meters. The mess hall went silent, not gradually, all at once, like someone had thrown a switch and killed every conversation simultaneously. Reagan stood slowly, brushed rice off her uniform with hands that didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. 60 beats per minute, steady as a metronome counting down to something nobody else could hear. She looked at Brennan again. Same clinical evaluation. Same cold assessment. In the 2 seconds of eye contact, Reagan's training presented her with 14 different responses. 7 would end with Brennan unconscious. 4 would end with him hospitalized. 3 would end with permanent damage that would require medical discharge. She chose option 15, the one her father had never taught her because Ghost Frost had believed that walking away was just another way of dying slowly. Reagan turned and walked out, boots measured on tile, shoulders square, back straight, the kind of control that suggested violence wasn't something foreign to her, just something she was actively choosing not to employ. The mess hall stayed quiet for another 5 seconds after she left. Then the noise returned, but muted, subdued, wrong. Like everyone recognized they'd just witnessed something they didn't understand, something that lived in the space between what happened and what could have happened. Brennan stood there with his fists still clenched, waiting for validation that didn't come. His boys, Wade and Garrett, looked at him with expressions that suggested the victory didn't feel like winning. From across the mess hall, Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Hartley watched it all with eyes that had seen 33 years of this particular pattern play out in dozens of mess halls across 3 decades of service. He recognized something in the way Reagan moved, the situational awareness, the economy of motion, the way she'd scanned the entire room before sitting down, choosing the corner table with her back to the wall, the table that gave her lines of sight to every entrance and exit. That wasn't training. That was something else, something earned in places where mistakes got you killed. Hartley stood slowly, his 64-year-old knees protesting the movement. He'd taken shrapnel in the right leg 33 years ago in Kuwait. Friendly fire from an A-10 that had mistaken his position for enemy armor. The wound had healed, but the memory hadn't. Neither had the image of a 17-year-old girl with gray eyes treating his wounds, while 8 dead Iraqi soldiers cooled in the desert night. He'd spent 33 years wondering if she'd been real or just something the blood loss and morphine had conjured. Wondering if the CIA really deployed teenage girls with sniper rifles. Wondering if Angel had been a call sign or a description. Now he was looking at Petty Officer First Class Reagan Frost walking out of the mess hall with that same economy of movement, that same dangerous calm, and Hartley felt something cold settle in his gut. Not concern for her, concern for what happened next. Because in his experience, people who moved like that only tolerated so much before they stopped tolerating anything at all. Hartley left his tray on the table and followed Reagan out. He didn't hurry, didn't draw attention. Just moved with the steady purpose of a man who'd learned long ago that the most important conversations happened in the spaces between official duties. He found her outside behind the mess hall, standing in the narrow alley between buildings where Marines went to smoke cigarettes and Marines went to hide from responsibilities they couldn't face. She wasn't smoking, just standing there with her hands at her sides, staring at the brick wall like it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. Petty Officer Frost. Reagan turned. Her hand moved toward her waistband before conscious thought could stop it. Combat reflex reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there because she wasn't deployed, and this was North Carolina, not Helmand. She caught herself, forced her hand back to her side. Hartley saw it, cataloged it, added it to the growing list of data points that suggested Reagan Frost was more than her service record claimed. Master guns. Her voice was steady, professional, empty of everything except the bare minimum required for military courtesy. That was restrained, Hartley said. Most people would have responded differently. Most people aren't trying to keep promises to dead men. The words came out flat, factual, like she was reading from a report instead of talking about something that mattered. Hartley nodded slowly. I saw what you didn't do in there. That takes more discipline than what you could have done. Reagan didn't respond, just kept looking at him with those gray eyes that were too old for 29 eyes, that had seen things Hartley recognized because he'd seen some of the same things in different deserts under different circumstances. Kuwait, Hartley said. January 29th, 1991. Friendly fire incident. A 10 strafed our position. 8 Iraqi soldiers closing on our location. Then they weren't closing anymore. 8 shots, 8 kills. We called the sniper angel. Reagan's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Not surprise, more like resignation. Like she'd known this conversation was coming eventually and had just been waiting for the calendar to catch up. I don't know what you're talking about, Master Guns. Yeah, Hartley said. You do. I've spent 33 years wondering if you were real. Wondering if the CIA really sent a kid to save my life. Wondering what kind of father teaches his daughter to kill like that. The kind who wanted her to survive, Reagan said. The words came out sharp, defensive. The first emotion she'd shown since walking out of the mess hall. Hartley held up one hand. I'm not judging. Your father was Ghost Frost. I worked with him in El Salvador 85 through 87. Best combat instructor I ever met. He talked about you sometimes. Said he was teaching his daughter everything he knew. I thought he meant self-defense. Didn't realize he meant everything. Reagan was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the defensive edge. Just tired now. Bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying weight that never got lighter. Ghost is dead, has been for 5 years. What he taught me doesn't matter anymore. It matters to the 6 Marines whose lives you saved in Kuwait. It matters to the Rangers you pulled out of Mogadishu in '93. It matters to every operator who worked with Angel over the past 12 years and came home because you were watching their backs. Reagan's hand started to tremble, barely visible, just enough that Hartley saw it and understood what it meant. Not fear. The effort required to maintain control when every operational instinct screamed at her to respond, to move, to do something other than stand there and let the past catch up with the present. How long have you known? She asked. About 30 seconds after you walked out of that mess hall. The way you moved, the threat assessment I saw in your eyes when Brennan approached. That's not something they teach at Navy A school. That's downrange muscle memory. Hartley reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn soft from 3 decades of handling. He unfolded it carefully, held it out to Reagan. The photo showed 6 Marines behind the burned hulk of an M1 Abrams tank. Kuwait. Night vision photography, the image grainy and greenish. 5 faces visible. 1 figure in the background, kneeling beside a wounded Marine face turned away from the camera. I carried this for 33 years, Hartley said. Never could make out your face. But I remembered your eyes. Gray like winter storms. Old eyes. 17-year-old kid with eyes that had already seen too much. Reagan took the photo, stared at it for a long time. When she handed it back, her hands had stopped trembling. That girl died in Kuwait, Master Guns. What's standing here now is just someone trying to honor a promise to a dead SEAL. Lieutenant Ash Sullivan, Hartley said. I read the casualty report. Ramadi, IED, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back. No, but teaching the next generation how to survive might honor his memory better than hiding from what you can do. Reagan looked at him sharply. I'm not hiding. I'm trying to be something other than a weapon. Weapons don't choose their targets, Hartley said. Teachers do. Big difference. Before Reagan could respond, Hartley's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from thoughtful to something harder, more focused. Captain Cole wants to see both of us. His office. 20 minutes. Hartley looked at Reagan with an expression that suggested apology and inevitability were close cousins. I think your cover is about to get complicated. Building 352, G2 Intelligence Shop. Captain Ryan Cole's office smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times and the particular stress that came from managing classified information in an unclassified building. Reagan stood at attention in front of his desk. Hartley stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back, his 64-year-old posture still parade ground perfect. Cole was 38, prior enlisted, force recon before he'd commissioned. He had the kind of presence that made Marines straighten spines without him raising his voice. The kind of command authority that came from leading men in actual combat instead of just training exercises. He looked at Reagan for a long moment before speaking. The mess hall incident has been reported through 3 separate channels, 2 from Marines who witnessed it, 1 from Corporal Brennan himself claiming you threatened him. I didn't speak to him, sir. I know. I've reviewed the security footage. You showed remarkable restraint. Most people in your position would have responded differently. Cole opened a file folder on his desk. Reagan saw the classification stamps. Top secret //SCI, no foreign. The kind of markings that meant the contents required clearances most people didn't have, and rooms most people couldn't enter. Your official record says you're a cryptologic technician first class. 3 years signals intelligence aboard destroyers. shore rotations at various installations, unremarkable service, no deployments to combat zones, no special qualifications beyond your basic rate requirements. Cole closed the folder, opened another one. This one had more stamps. Special access required. Ghost Program Personnel File. Your actual record tells a different story. Kuwait 1991. 8 confirmed kills at age 17. Somalia 1993. Overwatch during Operation Gothic Serpent. Black Hawk Down incident. Bosnia 1995. Kosovo 1999. Afghanistan 2001 through 2021. Iraq 2004 through 2011. Syria, Yemen, and locations I'm not cleared to discuss. Cole looked up at Reagan. 12 years embedded with JSOC elements. Ghost Program Operator. Call sign Angel 7. 43 confirmed missions in denied areas. 317 lives saved according to best estimates. 0 official recognition because you don't officially exist. Reagan's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. The mask she'd been wearing since Sullivan's death cracking just enough to let through a glimpse of the operational mind underneath. Sir, I requested transfer to a non-operational billet. I was told my cover would be maintained. Your cover is intact, Cole said, but Corporal Brennan's assault has created a situation that requires response. I can't have a Marine putting hands on a Navy petty officer without consequences, especially when that petty officer could have ended him 14 different ways and chose not to. 13, Reagan said quietly. I only counted 13 ways. Hartley made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Cole's expression didn't change. Master Guns Hartley has proposed a solution, a 3-day field assessment, leadership evaluation, physical endurance, mental resilience, tactical decision-making under pressure. Everything that matters when the bullets are real. You want me to evaluate Marines, sir? I want you to teach them the difference between thinking you're dangerous and actually being dangerous. Brennan has been vocal about warrior culture and standards. This assessment will test whether his talk matches his walk. Reagan was quiet for a moment. And if I refuse, sir, then Brennan faces administrative action for assault, you get transferred to another installation to maintain your cover, and 12 female operators currently deployed in denied areas lose the person who trained most of them. Cole leaned forward. You requested transfer to get away from operations. I understand that. But teaching the next generation how to survive isn't the same as operating. It's passing forward what you learned. That's the harder mission. Reagan looked at Hartley. The old Marine met her gaze with an expression that suggested he understood what she was being asked to do and why it mattered. Lieutenant Sullivan made me promise I'd stop being a weapon, Reagan said. This feels like just another way to use what I learned downrange. Sullivan was a good man, Hartley said. I served with him in Afghanistan 2009. He told me once that the best operators aren't the ones who survive the most missions. They're the ones who make sure the next generation survives theirs. He was talking about you. Reagan's jaw tightened. You talked to Ash about me. He talked about you, said he had a guardian angel who'd been watching his back since Somalia, said if anything happened to him, someone needed to make sure you understood that teaching was just another form of combat. The enemy is ignorance. The objective is survival. The mission never ends. Reagan closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted, not surrender, more like acceptance. 3 days, sir. Starting tomorrow morning, 0800 formation. I'll announce the assessment then. Brennan has already volunteered himself. I'll need 9 more Marines, and you as both evaluator and participant. Why participant, sir, if I'm evaluating? Because the best lessons are taught by example, Cole said. Brennan needs to see what real competence looks like. The other Marines need to understand that gender doesn't determine capability, and you need to prove to yourself that you can do this without guilt. Reagan nodded slowly. Understood, sir. I'll be ready. One more thing, Cole said. He pulled another folder from his desk. This one had no classification stamps, just a name written in permanent marker. William Frost. Reagan's breath caught. Your father isn't dead, Cole said quietly. Ghost Frost is alive. He's 79 years old. VA hospital in Phoenix, advanced dementia. Master Guns Hartley has been his point of contact for the past 33 years. Reagan looked at Hartley with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, hope, and grief in the space of 3 seconds. You knew. This whole time you knew he was alive. He made me promise not to tell you, Hartley said. Your safety depended on the cover story. If you'd known he was alive, you might have tried to contact him. That would have compromised both your operations and his. He's been alive for 33 years and you didn't tell me. I've been sending him reports on your career for 33 years. He knows everything you've done, every mission, every success, every loss. He followed it all from Phoenix. Reagan's hand started trembling again. This time, she didn't try to hide it. Does he remember me? Some days he does, some days he doesn't. The dementia is progressive. But on his good days, he remembers everything, including that he asked me to make sure you understood something. What? Hartley pulled a letter from his pocket. The envelope was worn, the handwriting shaky but legible. Reagan Frost written across the front. He wrote this 6 months ago, on one of his good days. Asked me to give it to you when the time was right. Hartley held out the letter. I think the time is right. Reagan took the letter with shaking hands. She didn't open it. Just held it like it might disappear if she wasn't careful. This assessment, she said, it's not just about Brennan, is it? No, Cole said. It's about you. Hartley thinks you're ready to transition from operator to instructor. I agree, but you need to prove it to yourself first. 3 days. Show these Marines what you can do. Then decide if teaching is worth doing. Reagan looked down at the letter in her hands, her father's handwriting. Proof that he'd been alive all this time, watching from a distance, unable to break cover even when the missions ended, and the wars moved on without him. I'll do the assessment, she said, but after that I'm going to Phoenix, to see him, before the dementia takes the rest. Agreed, Cole said. After the assessment, you'll have 2 weeks leave. Hartley will go with you. He knows Ghost better than anyone else alive. Reagan nodded. She tucked the letter carefully into her pocket next to her heart, where the weight of it would remind her that some debts transcended death and some promises outlasted the people who made them. Dismissed, Cole said. Reagan and Hartley left the office together. They walked in silence until they reached the parking lot, the North Carolina sun beating down with the kind of heat that made you remember why the South had a reputation for moving slowly. The letter, Reagan said. Did you read it? No, it's between you and Ghost. Reagan pulled the envelope out, stared at it for a long moment, then carefully opened it. The handwriting was shaky but readable. Ghost Frost had written it during one of his lucid periods, the words carrying the weight of 33 years of silence and separation. Reagan, you've been a weapon long enough. Be a teacher now. That's the harder war. The enemy is time forgetting, and the next generation making the same mistakes we did. Win that war for me. Beirut took your mother. I made sure it wouldn't take you. Everything I taught you, every hard lesson, every night in the desert, learning to read wind and distance, it was all so you'd survive. You survived. That's enough for one lifetime. Now pass it forward. Teach them what I taught you. Teach them what you learned in the dark places I couldn't follow. Teach them that surviving isn't enough. They have to pass it forward too. That's legacy, not the kills, not the missions, the knowledge that keeps going after we're gone. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Ghost Reagan read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it back in her pocket. He knew, she said. He knew I'd try to stop being a weapon, and he knew I'd need permission. Ghost always knew, Hartley said. That's what made him the best instructor I ever met. He didn't just teach tactics. He taught you how to think, how to survive, and when to stop. Reagan looked at the sky, clear blue, not a cloud in sight. The kind of sky that made you remember there was a world beyond the wars and the missions and the promises to dead men. Tomorrow morning, and she said, 0800, I'll be ready. I know you will, Hartley said. You've been ready since you were 17. You just needed someone to tell you it was okay to use that readiness in a different way. Reagan walked to her barracks alone. She had a letter to read again, a promise to keep, and a 3-day assessment that would determine whether the weapon could become the teacher. The sun was setting over Camp Lejeune when she finally opened the letter one more time and whispered to the ghost of the man who'd taught her everything. I'll pass it forward, Dad, I promise. And Reagan Frost kept her promises, even the ones that hurt, especially the ones that hurt. The formation assembled at 0800 on a Thursday morning that came in cool and overcast. August in North Carolina carried a particular quality of humidity that made breathing feel like drowning slowly in air that had given up pretending to be breathable. 140 Marines stood in ranks on the company parade deck, boots aligned, spine straight, eyes forward. The assembled mass of enlisted personnel waiting to hear why their Thursday morning PT had been replaced with a company formation that nobody had been briefed on, and everyone suspected meant someone's career was about to end badly. Reagan stood in the back rank wearing her Navy working uniform Type 3. The blue-gray digital pattern marked her as different, other, the squid among jarheads. She kept her face neutral, shoulders squared, hands at her sides. Everything about her posture said she was just another body in formation. Nothing special, nothing worth noticing. But Captain Cole noticed. His eyes found her immediately when he turned to address the company, settling on her with an expression that suggested he knew something nobody else did and was about to make that knowledge everyone's problem. Cole paced in front of the formation with his hands clasped behind his back. 38 years old, but moving like someone older, carrying the accumulated weight of decisions made in places where wrong answers got people killed. Prior enlisted, force recon, the kind of officer who'd earned his commission through blood and time instead of college applications and family connections. Certain behaviors have come to my attention, Cole said. His voice carried across the formation without him raising it. Command presence earned through leading men who trusted you to keep them alive. Behaviors that violate basic standards of discipline and respect. Behaviors that would get people killed in combat and embarrass this company and garrison. The formation stayed silent. Nobody fidgeted, nobody coughed. When Captain Cole talked, you listened. Those behaviors will be addressed through immediate action. Starting now, we're conducting a compressed 3-day field assessment, leadership evaluation. You'll be tested on everything from land navigation to tactical decision-making under pressure, combat casualty care, small unit leadership, physical endurance, mental resilience. Murmurs rippled through the ranks, quickly suppressed but present. 3-day assessments weren't normal. 3-day assessments meant something had gone wrong and someone was about to pay for it. Results will become part of your permanent service records, Cole continued. They will influence future assignments, promotions, schools, everything that matters to your career. He paused, let the words settle like dust after an explosion. I expect Corporal Cole Brennan to volunteer, given how vocal he's been about standards and warrior culture. Every head in the formation turned slightly. Not obviously, just enough. Looking for Brennan. He stood 3 ranks forward, 2 positions left. His face flushed red, jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. He couldn't back down, not in front of the entire company, not after everything he'd said about being a warrior, about standards, about how some people didn't belong. Yes, sir, Brennan said, voice tight like wire pulled to breaking. I volunteer. Outstanding, Cole said. I need 9 more volunteers. Senior lance corporals, junior NCOs, anyone who thinks they're ready to prove what they're worth. 7 Marines stepped forward immediately. The kind who were always first to volunteer because they believed in testing themselves or because they were too stupid to know better. The line between courage and ignorance was thinner than most people admitted. Cole scanned the remaining ranks. Then his eyes settled on Reagan again. Deliberate, calculated. I'm also specifically requesting Petty Officer First Class Reagan Frost participate as both evaluator and participant. The formation went dead silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from discipline, the kind that comes from confusion. Navy petty officers didn't participate in Marine leadership assessments. Navy petty officers sure as hell didn't evaluate them. Her personnel file indicates instructor-level qualifications in small unit tactics from previous joint training assignments, Cole said. The way he emphasized previous joint training sounded casual, but Reagan heard the code underneath. He'd read her real file, not the cover story. The actual service record that required special clearances to access. Reagan stepped forward without hesitation, kept her face neutral, even though her heart rate had kicked up 20 beats per minute. Aye, sir. Brennan's face had gone from red to white, like someone had opened a valve and drained all the blood out. He stared at Reagan with an expression that cycled between anger and something closer to fear, like some part of his primitive brain had just realized he'd made a terrible mistake, but his conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. Cole dismissed the formation, told everyone except the 10 volunteers to return to their normal duties. The assessment would begin immediately. Full combat load, 12-mile tactical movement with simulated casualties. Then it got harder from there. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes and Gunnery Sergeant Leon Vance fell in as evaluators. Hayes was the combat engineer who'd watched Reagan leave the mess hall with that look in his eyes that had said he knew something nobody else did. Vance was former Marine Special Operations Command, the kind of squared-away gunnery sergeant who'd forgotten more about combat than most Marines would ever learn. They both looked at Reagan with expressions that were carefully neutral, the kind of neutrality that suggested they were reserving judgment, but had suspicions they weren't ready to voice. The 10 volunteers formed up. Brennan stood at the front, chest inflated, trying to look confident. 2 of his usual crew, Wade and Garrett, flanked him. They'd laughed when he'd shoved Reagan in the mess hall. They weren't laughing now. They looked nervous. Reagan stood near the back. She'd cinched her pack down tight, adjusted her load-bearing vest, checked her boots. Everything done with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested she'd done this before many times in places where getting your gear right meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hartley appeared from the company office. 64 years old, but still moving like a man who remembered what it felt like to hump a ruck across hostile terrain when every step mattered and quitting meant dying. "Listen up," Hartley said. "This assessment starts now and doesn't stop for 3 days. You will be evaluated on every decision you make, every word you speak, every action you take. Your performance will determine whether you're qualified to lead Marines in combat or whether you're just good at talking about combat." He looked directly at Brennan. Let the silence stretch. "Move out." The 12-mile route cut across varied terrain. Paved road for the first 2 miles, then dirt trail through pine forest, then no trail at all. Just sandy soil that shifted under boots and made every step cost more energy than it should. Brennan immediately set a hard pace. Aggressive, trying to establish dominance through speed. His 2 crew members kept up. The other Marines fell in behind, settling into the rhythm of the hump, the familiar misery of carrying weight across distance. Reagan stayed in the middle of the pack, not leading, not falling behind, just moving with that efficient economy of motion that came from carrying weight across hostile terrain where speed mattered, but endurance mattered more. Her breathing stayed steady, 60 beats per minute, same rhythm her father had drilled into her when she was 12 years old running the Arizona desert with a weighted pack, while Ghost Frost followed in a truck timing her splits and cataloging her mistakes. By mile 4, the terrain had transitioned from trail to pure backcountry, pine forest and sandy soil. The temperature was climbing, humidity building, sweat soaked through uniforms, pack straps dug into shoulders. The weight that felt manageable at mile 1 felt crushing at mile 4. Brennan was still pushing hard, but his form was deteriorating. Shoulders hunched forward, stride shortened, breathing ragged. He was strong, nobody could question that. But strength without efficiency was just a countdown to failure. Reagan tracked him with peripheral vision, watched his gait pattern change, watched the micro-adjustments his body made to compensate for fatigue, watched him start to break down in real time. At mile 5, Staff Sergeant Hayes stepped out from behind a pine tree wearing a red vest marked casualty. "IED strike," Hayes announced. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd seen real IED strikes and knew the difference between simulation and survival. 2 wounded, 1 critical, 1 deambulatory. Limited time before follow-on attack. "What do you do?" Brennan rushed forward immediately. Tried to perform a fireman's carry on Hayes. Wrong technique, wrong application. He was treating this like a gym exercise instead of a tactical problem. No consideration for whether moving the casualty would worsen injuries. No assessment of the tactical situation. No security established. He was gassing out. You could see it in the way his legs trembled, the way he had to set Hayes down after 20 meters because his strength was failing. Reagan watched for 10 seconds, then stepped forward. "Permission to demonstrate proper tactical casualty drag, Staff Sergeant." Hayes looked at her, then at Hartley, who was observing from 30 meters back. Hartley nodded once. "Proceed, Petty Officer." Reagan knelt beside Hayes. When she spoke, her voice was calm, instructional, the tone of someone who'd done this for real when the casualty was actually bleeding and the follow-on attack was actually coming. "In a real IED strike, you assume secondary devices or enemy observation. Speed matters, but so does technique." Her hands moved as she talked, demonstrating without rushing. "First priority is move the casualty to cover, not carry, drag. Preserves the spine, protects the airway, and you can do it when you're exhausted." She demonstrated, grabbed Hayes' load-bearing vest by the drag handle, kept low, pulled him 20 meters to a depression behind a fallen log that provided cover and concealment. The whole movement took 15 seconds. Smooth, controlled, no wasted energy. "Second priority is assessment," Reagan continued. "Check breathing. Check massive hemorrhage. Check for tension pneumothorax. In that order. Everything else waits." Hayes was watching her with narrowed eyes. So was Gunnery Sergeant Vance. They recognized something in her movements, something that went beyond training. This was muscle memory, operational experience, the kind that only came from doing it for real when mistakes meant death. "This technique kept a Marine alive in Kuwait, 1991, Reagan said. Her voice hadn't changed, but something in her eyes had. Remembering. Sucking chest wound, friendly fire. I held pressure for 40 minutes until medevac arrived. He survived because the drag didn't worsen the injury and the treatment was immediate. Hartley stepped forward, his voice carried across the training area with the weight of 33 years. That Marine was me. I was 31. The person treating me was 17 years old. The volunteers went silent, staring, processing. Brennan looked like he'd been punched in the stomach and was still trying to figure out which direction the hit had come from. Hartley let the silence stretch. Then, continue movement. They continued. Mile 6, mile 7. The second Marine dropped out. Heat casualty. He'd been pushing too hard trying to keep up with Brennan's aggressive pace, and his body had quit. They left him with water and a safety observer and kept moving. By mile 8, Brennan's form was completely broken. He was survival shuffling now, just putting one foot in front of the other through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. His crew members weren't much better. Wade was still functional but struggling. Garrett looked like he was about to vomit. Reagan hadn't changed pace once, hadn't altered her breathing, hadn't adjusted her stride. She moved like someone who'd done this, carrying heavier loads across worse terrain in places where falling behind meant getting left behind permanently. At mile 10, the third Marine dropped, then the fourth. Bodies don't negotiate. When they're done, they're done. By mile 12, only 6 of the original 10 were still functional. Brennan finished barely, bent over with his hands on his knees, dry heaving, looking like death warmed over and then cooled back down. His crew members collapsed on the ground. 3 other Marines were in similar shape. Reagan walked across the finish line looking like she was ready for another 12 miles. She found shade, drank water with measured sips, stretched methodically, waited. Hayes walked over to Vance. They stood close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry, but Reagan could read their body language. The way Hayes gestured, the way Vance nodded slowly, the way they both looked back at her with expressions that had shifted from evaluation to recognition. They knew, or at least they suspected. You didn't move like that without operational experience. You didn't maintain that kind of efficiency without having done it in places where movement was real and consequences were permanent. Hartley gave them 15 minutes to hydrate and recover. Then he announced the next evolution: tactical problem solving, building clearance, limited intelligence. You'll need to plan and execute. This is where things get interesting. Building 1134 was a concrete structure left over from the 1960s built for urban combat training before the Marine Corps realized that Iraq and Afghanistan didn't look anything like the training facilities they'd constructed during the Cold War. 3 stories, multiple rooms, narrow corridors, the kind of environment where everything could go wrong in the span of a single heartbeat. Brennan immediately tried to take charge. He was standing now, still breathing hard, but trying to project authority through volume and confidence. Okay, listen up. We need to move fast. Speed and aggression. That's how you win. He started issuing orders based on action movies instead of doctrine. Reagan recognized the pattern. She'd seen it before in young operators who confused Hollywood with reality, who thought violence was about volume instead of precision. We rush the door. I go first. Wade, you're behind me. Everyone else follows close. We flood the room, overwhelm any threats through violence of action. It sounded good if you didn't know any better. It sounded like every military movie ever made. It would get everyone killed in about 30 seconds if this was real. Lance Corporal Reed raised his hand, young, maybe 20. Smart enough to ask questions. What about fatal funnels? What about them? Brennan shot back, defensive, his ego interpreting questions as challenges. Doorways are fatal funnels. We stack up outside the door, we're bunched. One grenade kills everyone. We rush through the door, we're silhouetted, makes us easy targets. Brennan waved him off with the kind of dismissive gesture that revealed more about his insecurity than his confidence. Speed negates that. We move too fast for them to react. Reagan watched this disaster develop for 2 minutes. Watched Brennan ignore basic tactical principles. Watched him treat this like a Hollywood sequence instead of a doctrinal problem with doctrinal solutions. She could let it play out. Let him fail. Let the simulation prove what words couldn't teach. But that wasn't why she was here. Hartley had made that clear. This wasn't about letting Brennan fail. This was about showing him what success looked like so he could build toward it. May I make a recommendation, Staff Sergeant? Reagan said, looking at Hayes. Hayes glanced at Hartley. Hartley nodded. Permission granted through gesture. Proceed, Petty Officer. Reagan found a clear patch of dirt, used a stick to sketch the building layout they'd been given. Her movements were economical, practiced. The stick moved across dirt like a rifle barrel, tracking targets. Four-man stack on the left side of the door. Not centered. She marked an X in the dirt. Fatal funnel is here. Anyone standing there when the door opens is in the kill zone. She drew clean lines. Precise angles. Her stick moved with certainty born from clearing buildings where the rooms held real threats and mistakes became obituaries. Support by fire position here. Elevated if possible. She marked another position. Overlapping field of fire covers this angle and this angle. They can see the door, but they're not exposed to it. Her stick moved to show entry sequence. Button hook patterns. Fields of fire that overlapped without crossing into friendly positions. Breach team enters in sequence. First man button hooks left. Second man button hooks right. Never cross the center of the doorway. That's the fatal funnel. You clear corners first. Weapons up. Verbal communication. Clear left. Clear right. Everyone knows the status. She referenced Marine Corps Warfighting Publication 3-35.3 from memory. Page numbers. Section headings. Specific techniques that she'd used in Bosnia and Iraq and Afghanistan when the buildings were real and the clearing had consequences. This is progressive clearing. Room to hallway to next room. You maintain security throughout. You don't rush. You move with purpose, but you don't sacrifice security for speed because speed gets you killed. She explained angles of attack, overlapping fields of fire, how to minimize exposure while maximizing coverage, how to communicate without compromising the element of surprise, how to think 3 steps ahead because the enemy was thinking 2 steps ahead and the person who thought furthest won. Fatal funnels killed 220 Marines in Beirut 1983. Reagan's voice didn't waver, but her eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere dark. 1 truck bomb, 1 building. My mother died in that barracks. She looked at the assembled Marines, at Brennan specifically. My father spent the next 18 hours pulling bodies out of rubble. Most weren't whole. He spent the rest of his life teaching me not to repeat that mistake. She tapped the X she'd marked for the fatal funnel. We don't repeat mistakes. That's what doctrine is for. That's what the manual exists to prevent. Every technique in that publication was written in someone's blood. We honor that blood by learning the lessons it paid for. When she finished, the dirt held a tactical plan that was textbook perfect. Not because it was complicated, because it was simple, because it prioritized the principles that mattered. Security, communication, progressive movement, all the things that kept people alive when buildings had bad guys inside them. Hayes looked at the sketch, looked at Reagan. His expression had shifted from neutral evaluation to something closer to respect. Execute Petty Officer Frost's plan. Brennan started to argue, but Hayes cut him off with a look that could have stripped paint. That's not a suggestion, Corporal. That's an order. They executed the plan. It worked flawlessly. The simulated building clearance happened with 0 simulated casualties. Movement was smooth, professional, lethal in the way that real operations were lethal through precision and discipline, not through volume and aggression. When they finished, Vance walked over to Hayes and said something quiet. Hayes nodded slowly. They both looked at Reagan with expressions that had moved from suspicion to certainty. She wasn't just trained, she was operational, and that changed everything. Hartley called a halt, gave them 30 minutes to eat and hydrate before the next evolution. Reagan sat alone under a pine tree working through an MRE that tasted like cardboard pressed into the shape of food and given up on flavor as a lost cause. She was halfway through the entree when Hayes approached. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Reagan looked up, set down her plastic spoon. "Staff Sergeant." Hayes sat down without being invited. His movements were careful, like he was approaching something fragile that might break if handled wrong. Mogadishu, October 1993. Black Hawk down. Reagan's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Recognition. Memory. The weight of a name that carried 30 years of survivor's guilt. "There was a sniper," Hayes continued. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. They shook like he was back in that market. "Call sign Angel. 3 shots, 800 meters, through windows we couldn't see into. Saved my squad when we were pinned in Bakara Market." He paused, looked at Reagan like he was seeing a ghost. "I was 19, Army Ranger. We were out of ammunition, out of options, Somali militia everywhere, RPGs, small arms fire. We were going to die in that market." Hayes's hands clenched into fists, relaxed, clenched again. Then 3 shots, 3 hostiles down, impossible angles. My squad leader said it was an angel watching over us. I thought he was being poetic, trying to keep morale up. He wasn't being poetic, Reagan said quietly. Hayes stared at her. I spent 30 years wondering if I imagined it, wondering if the person was even real. I put in FOIA requests, called every sniper I knew. Nobody had answers. Everyone said Black Hawk Down was all Rangers and Delta. No mention of any sniper providing overwatch. That's because I wasn't supposed to be there. CIA asset, deniable, off the books. How old were you? 19, same as you. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice cracked like ice breaking under pressure. I got married, had 3 kids, became a combat engineer, built a career, built a life. All of it happened because you made 3 shots from 800 meters through windows. I still can't figure out how you saw through. High angle, 3rd floor position across the market. Good scope, better training, and a father who believed that perfect practice made permanent performance. No, Hayes shook his head. It was more than that. You chose to take those shots. You didn't have to. You could have stayed hidden. Let us die. Kept yourself safe. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed you. My father would have known, and he raised me better than that. Hayes extended his hand. Reagan shook it. His grip was firm, grateful. The handshake of someone who'd carried a debt for 30 years and was finally getting to acknowledge it. Thank you for my life, ma'am. Thank you for my wife knowing her husband. Thank you for my kids knowing their father. Thank you for every moment I got that you gave me. Reagan's grip tightened. Her voice was firm. Pass it forward, Sergeant. Teach someone else to survive. Teach them the lessons that kept you alive. That's how you thank me. That's how you honor those 3 shots. You make sure the next generation doesn't need an angel because they learned the lessons that prevented the crisis. Hayes nodded, stood. His hands had stopped shaking. I will. I promise. He walked away and Reagan went back to her MRE, but the weight on her shoulders felt different now. Not lighter, just redistributed. Shared. Acknowledged. 30 years of survivor's guilt hadn't been erased, but it had been witnessed. Given permission to transform into purpose instead of remaining stuck as pain. That was enough. Hartley appeared beside her, sat down with a grunt that spoke of 64-year-old knees protesting movement they used to handle without complaint. Hayes was one of yours, he said, not a question, a statement. One of many. How many, Reagan? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the MRE like it held answers to questions she'd stopped asking years ago. I stopped counting after the first 100. The number stopped mattering. All that mattered was whether they made it home. Did they? Most of them. Not all, never all. Her jaw tightened. Lieutenant Sullivan made it home from 42 missions, then died on 43. Routine convoy in a city that was supposed to be stable. IED on a road we'd cleared twice that morning. The math doesn't work. The good ones die, and the bad ones live, and there's no equation that makes it make sense. Hartley was quiet. He understood. 33 years of service had taught him the same lesson. The universe didn't operate on fairness. It operated on chaos barely held in check by training and luck and the occasional miracle. Your father told me something in El Salvador, Hartley said. 1987. We were running a training mission for Salvadoran Special Forces. Ghost said, the hardest part isn't teaching them to fight. It's teaching them when to stop. I didn't understand what he meant then. And now I understand perfectly. You've been fighting since you were 17. 12 years of operations. 43 confirmed missions. How many that weren't confirmed? Does it matter? It matters because you're trying to stop, trying to honor the promise you made to Sullivan. But stopping is harder than fighting because nobody teaches you how. Reagan looked at him. Is that what this assessment is, teaching me how to stop? This assessment is teaching you that stopping doesn't mean quitting. It means evolving. Your father understood that distinction. So did Sullivan. Now you have to understand it. Before Reagan could respond, Hartley's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, and his expression shifted from thoughtful to something harder, more focused. Commander Blackwell just arrived on base. She's got a situation. Syria. One of your operators is in trouble. Reagan was on her feet before Hartley finished the sentence. The MRE forgotten. Her entire nervous system shifting from training mode to operational mode in the span of a single breath. Which one? Angel 2, Kayla Morrison, 26 years old, embedded with Army Special Forces near the Turkish border. Heavy contact. She's requesting tactical guidance from Angel 7. Reagan's mind was already shifting gears. From training evolution to operational planning. From instructor to operator. The transition was instantaneous. 12 years of muscle memory overriding conscious thought. I need satellite phone, encrypted line, access to real-time imagery if available. Commander Blackwell is setting it up now in the command post. But Reagan, you're in the middle of an assessment. If you break cover to run an operation from here, questions get asked. Then I run the operation without breaking cover. I've done harder. I know you have. That's what worries me. The combat casualty care evolution started at 1400 hours under a sun that had stopped apologizing for the heat and started actively trying to kill everyone through atmospheric pressure and humidity that made breathing feel like an optional activity the body might give up on. 6 simulated casualties appeared when pyrotechnics detonated across the training area. Blank rounds cracked overhead. Smoke grenades filled the air with choking gray clouds that smelled like sulfur and old mistakes. Someone was screaming. Someone else was yelling contradictory orders. It was chaos. Intentional chaos, the kind that revealed who could think under pressure and who just reacted. Reagan had a satellite phone pressed to her ear. Commander Blackwell's voice crackled through the encrypted connection, tinny and distant, but clear enough. Angel 7. Angel 2 is pinned in a compound. 4 hostiles outside, unknown number inside. She's got 1 local asset with her wounded femoral bleed. No exfil available for 90 minutes. Reagan scanned the 6 training casualties in front of her while simultaneously processing the real-world crisis 6,000 miles away. Her brain partitioned the 2 problems into separate processing streams. Training evolution left hemisphere. Real operation right hemisphere. Both running simultaneously without interference. Angel 2, this is Angel 7. Reagan's voice was calm. Command voice. The tone that made people stop panicking because someone who knew what they were doing had arrived. I need you to breathe and listen to my voice. You've trained for this. You've got this. She walked toward the training casualties while talking. Her eyes tracked the simulated wounded while her mind tracked the real crisis in Syria. First priority, tourniquet on your asset, high and tight on the thigh. Use your rigger's belt if you don't have a cat. Twist until bleeding stops. Mark the time on his forehead with his blood. You have 2 hours before you worry about the limb, life over limb, always. Reagan knelt beside casualty 1, the simulated tension pneumothorax. She checked for tracheal deviation, distended neck veins. Both present. Garrett maintained covering fire from that berm. 3 round bursts, conserve ammunition. You're protecting us, not winning the firefight. She positioned the chest seal while still talking into the phone. Angel 2, once your asset is stable, assess your tactical situation. 4 hostiles outside. What are their positions? Reagan applied the chest seal during the casualty's exhalation. Created a one-way valve, air out not in, monitored for signs of pressure buildup. This is tension pneumothorax, she said to the watching Marines while simultaneously processing Angel 2's response about hostile positions. Air trapped in chest cavity, collapses the lung, compresses the heart. He dies in minutes without treatment. She smoothed the chest seal edges, checked the seal integrity. Brennan, you were going to apply this without checking for tension first. That would have killed him. Seal without decompression just adds more pressure. Basic tactical combat casualty care. Into the phone, Angel 2 Northeast hostile is your primary threat. He's got the angle on your position. Can you reach the window on the 2nd floor? Reagan moved to casualty 2. The femoral bleed. Wade had attempted a tourniquet but placed it wrong. Too low. Wouldn't stop arterial bleeding. Tourniquet goes here. She repositioned it. High and tight on the thigh. Above the wound, not on the wound. Tighten until bleeding stops completely. She twisted the windlass, counted the clicks, felt the resistance. Tightened 2 more clicks past where Wade had stopped. Yes, it hurts. He lives. That's the trade. She grabbed a marker, wrote on the casualty's forehead in large letters, 1420 hours. Into the phone, good. 2nd floor window gives you overwatch on the northeast position. Take that hostile first. 1 shot, then shift to their vehicle. Disable it. They can't reinforce if they can't move. Reagan checked casualty 3. The traumatic amputation, lower leg, tourniquet already applied by one of the other Marines. She checked the placement, adequate. But she packed the wound anyway with combat gauze for good measure. Direct pressure on the wound, don't be gentle. Push until the bleeding stops or the gauze is gone. Whichever comes first. Into the phone. I'm hearing the shot. Good kill. Now the vehicle. Engine block or tires, your choice, but make it count. Casualty 4. Head injury. Unconscious. Reagan checked airway, breathing, circulation. All adequate for now. She rolled him into recovery position. Checked his pupils. Equal and reactive. Good sign. Monitor responsiveness every 5 minutes. Check pupils. If they become unequal or non-reactive, that's increased intracranial pressure. Nothing you can do in the field, but it tells you how fast you need to move for medevac. Into the phone. Vehicles down. Good. 2 hostiles remaining. They're going to make a decision now. Rush your position or withdraw. Which do you think? Reagan moved to casualty 5. Burns, face and hands. She couldn't do much in a field environment, but she could prevent shock and infection. Cool water if available, not ice. Don't break blisters. Cover with clean dressings. Treat for shock. That's all you can do until you get him to a burn center. Into the phone listening to Angel 2's tactical assessment. Agreed, they're withdrawing. Let them go. You've neutralized the threat. Don't create additional contact when exfil is 90 minutes out. Secure the compound. Treat your asset. I'll stay on the line. Casualty 6, abdominal evisceration. The worst of the simulated casualties. Reagan assessed quickly. In a real scenario, this was expectant. Likely to die regardless of treatment. But you tried anyway because sometimes unlikely wasn't the same as impossible. Don't push the organs back in. Cover with moist dressing. Treat for shock. That's all you can do. In a real scenario, this Marine needs a surgeon in the next 30 minutes or he's dead. Your job is to buy him those 30 minutes. She set the phone down for a moment, looked at the assembled Marines who'd been watching her work. That's how you treat mass casualties under fire. You triage first, treat second. You prioritize by severity, not proximity. You never panic because panic kills more people than bullets. And you accept that sometimes your best isn't good enough and people die anyway. That's not failure, that's mathematics. The entire sequence had taken 4 minutes. All 6 casualties treated. All critical interventions performed correctly. And she'd done it while blank rounds cracked overhead and pyrotechnics detonated, and she was simultaneously coordinating a real operation in Syria through a satellite phone. Hayes and Vance were staring at her, not with evaluation in their eyes anymore, with something closer to awe mixed with recognition. They'd seen operational tempo before. They knew what it looked like when someone's brain was running multiple crisis situations simultaneously and managing both without dropping either. Reagan picked up the satellite phone. Angel 2 status update. She listened, nodded. Her expression softened slightly. Relief bleeding through the operational mask. Good work. Asset is stable. Compound is secure. 85 minutes until exfil. You're going to make it. She paused, listened to Angel 2's response. The fear in the younger operator's voice. The relief at hearing Angel 7's calm authority cutting through the chaos. Yes, I'm sure you're going to make it. Because I trained you, and my training doesn't fail unless you panic. You didn't panic, so you're going to walk onto that helicopter flight to the safe house and debrief this mission as a success. I'll stay on the line until exfil is complete. Reagan sat down with the phone pressed to her ear. Around her, the 6 simulated casualties were being assessed by the evaluators. All saves. 0 preventable deaths. Textbook execution under maximum stress while running a real operation 6,000 miles away. But Reagan wasn't thinking about the assessment anymore. She was thinking about Angel 2, Kayla Morrison, 26 years old. Former Army linguist recruited into Ghost program 2 years ago. Smart, capable, but young. Still learning to trust her training when the bullets were real and the fear was overwhelming. Reagan had trained Kayla personally. 6 months of intense preparation. Teaching her everything Ghost Frost had taught Reagan. How to think tactically. How to stay calm. How to survive when survival seemed impossible. Now that training was being tested in real time, and Reagan was 6,000 miles away, unable to do anything except talk Kayla through it and hope the training held. Hartley sat down beside Reagan. Didn't speak, just sat there in solidarity while she waited for the next 85 minutes to pass, waiting to hear whether her training had been good enough, whether Kayla would make it home, whether the next generation survived because the previous generation had taught them right. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of the training evolution continuing around them. Marines learning lessons that might save their lives someday. Instructors teaching techniques written in blood by people who'd learned the hard way. This was the mission now, not operating. Teaching, guiding from a distance instead of leading from the front. Trusting that the training was enough because you couldn't be there yourself. It was harder than Reagan had expected. Harder than any mission she'd ever run downrange. Because at least downrange she'd controlled the outcome. Here she just gave tools and hoped they were enough. 85 minutes later, the satellite phone crackled. Angel 7, this is Angel 2. Exfil, complete, asset loaded. We're wheels up, 0 casualties, mission success. Reagan closed her eyes, let out a breath she'd been holding for 90 minutes. Good work, Angel 2. I'm proud of you. Thank you for staying on the line. You didn't have to. Reagan's voice was firm. Yes, I did. Some debts don't have expiration dates. She ended the call, set the phone down. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from relief. From the weight of knowing she just saved another life from 6,000 miles away while pretending to run a training evolution. Hartley looked at her with an expression that mixed concern and understanding. You okay? I just proved something, Master Guns. What's that? I can lead from here. I don't need to be downrange anymore. I can guide them home from North Carolina. Maybe that's enough. Hartley nodded slowly. Your father would say that's the harder mission, being the voice that guides them through the dark instead of being the person walking through it. Reagan stood, brushed dirt off her uniform. The assessment wasn't over. There was still one more evolution, the hardest one. What's next? 24-hour patrol-based defense, no sleep, continuous security, leadership rotations, everything that matters in combat compressed into one day. Reagan looked at Brennan. He was sitting in the dirt 50 meters away, staring at nothing, processing, breaking down. The assessment was doing what it was designed to do, showing him what he actually was instead of what he'd been pretending to be. He's going to break, Reagan said quietly. Probably, Hartley agreed. Question is whether he learns from breaking or whether he just breaks. That's up to him. I can teach technique. I can teach tactics. But I can't teach someone how to handle failure. They have to learn that themselves. Your father said the same thing in El Salvador. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be earned through pain. Reagan nodded, looked at the sky. The sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. In 12 hours, they'd start the 24-hour defense evolution. And somewhere in that 24 hours, Cole Brennan would discover what he was actually made of instead of what he'd been pretending to be. Reagan just hoped he survived the discovery. Because not everyone did. The 24-hour patrol-based defense began at 0600 on day 3 with a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten rain for the next day straight. The kind of North Carolina weather that made you understand why the South had bred a particular kind of stubbornness in its people, the kind that came from refusing to let the humidity win. They'd established the patrol base in a clearing surrounded by pine forest thick enough to provide concealment, but sparse enough that you could see threats coming if you knew how to read terrain the way Reagan had learned to read it before she was old enough to drive. Brennan took first watch rotation. He positioned the security post with adequate spacing, established fields of fire that overlapped enough to prevent gaps. The basics were there. He'd studied the manual, knew the doctrine. But knowing and doing were separated by the kind of distance that only exhaustion could reveal. Reagan observed from the command post a depression behind a fallen oak that provided cover and elevation. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, didn't plan to sleep for another 12. Her body had learned long ago how to function on adrenaline and will when sleep became a luxury the mission couldn't afford. Hartley sat beside her nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He'd been awake as long as she had, maybe longer. 64-year-old discipline, keeping his eyes sharp when younger men were already starting to fade. He's doing okay, Hartley said quietly, watching Brennan move between positions. Not great, but okay. For now, Reagan said. Wait until hour 12. That's when the mistakes start. Hour 18 is when they become dangerous. Voice of experience. Helmand, Operation Desert Viper. 72 hours holding a compound with 5 operators against militia forces that should have overrun us in the first 12 hours. Reagan's voice was flat, factual. Hour 18 was when Lieutenant Sullivan started making calls that would have gotten us all killed if I hadn't been there to catch them. Her jaw tightened, the memory still raw despite 3 years and 6,000 miles of distance. He was exhausted, we all were, but he was the team leader. He had to make the decisions. And exhaustion makes you stupid in ways that get people killed. I had to correct him 3 times in hour 18. By hour 24, I was making the calls and he was executing. We'd reversed the chain of command because his brain had stopped processing risk correctly. Hartley was quiet for a moment. That's trust. He trusted you enough to let you lead when he couldn't. That's survival. He was smart enough to recognize his limitations before they killed us. Reagan's eyes tracked Brennan. Question is whether Brennan is that smart. By hour 6, Brennan was already missing details. Reagan watched him forget to rotate the watch at the North Post. Leaving Lance Corporal Reed on security for 3 hours straight, when doctrine said 2 hours maximum before attention degraded past reliability. She stood, walked over to Brennan, kept her voice low enough that only he could hear. Reed has been on watch for 3 hours. He needs rest or he'll miss something that kills us. Brennan looked at his watch. His face registered surprise, then embarrassment. He'd lost track of time. First sign of fatigue making decisions his brain couldn't process anymore. Right, thanks. He moved to correct the rotation. Reagan walked back to the command post, sat down beside Hartley. Hour 6 and he's already missing details, she said. You going to keep correcting him? Until he learns or until he breaks, whichever comes first. Hour 12 brought more mistakes. Brennan forgot to pre-position casualty equipment, leaving the aid bags in the command post instead of at each fighting position where they'd be accessible under fire. Reagan moved them herself, redistributing the equipment, while Brennan was checking the south perimeter. When he returned, he noticed the bags had moved, but didn't say anything. Pride or exhaustion, or maybe both, keeping his mouth shut. Hour 15 brought the first near disaster. Brennan wanted to send a 2-man patrol to check a suspected observation post without conducting a communications check first. Reagan intercepted him before he could give the order. Comms check before movement, she said. If they hit trouble, we need to hear it. Brennan nodded, ran the comms check, discovered that one of the radios had a dead battery. If the patrol had gone out, they'd have been operating without reliable communication. In a real environment, that's how people died alone. Good catch, Brennan said. His voice was thick with exhaustion. It's not a catch, it's procedure. You follow procedure or people die. That's not opinion. That's mathematics. Hour 18 arrived with Brennan micro-sleeping. Reagan watched him nod off, standing up, catch himself, shake his head, try to stay awake through sheer force of will. It wasn't working. He tried to reposition the machine gun team to a location with no cover and limited fields of fire. Just catastrophically bad judgment brought on by a brain that had stopped processing information correctly. Reagan stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. That position is a kill box. They'll be dead in 30 seconds if someone attacks from the east. Brennan stared at the position like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. I don't understand. It has good visibility. Visibility isn't the same as cover. They can see the enemy, but the enemy can see them. And the enemy has the high ground. That's not a fighting position. That's a grave waiting to be filled. She walked him to a better location, 20 meters west, behind a natural berm that provided cover while maintaining adequate fields of fire. Here, they can see without being seen. They have cover if they take fire, and they have fallback positions if the enemy flanks. That's how you keep people alive. Brennan just nodded, too exhausted to argue, too exhausted to care, just trying to survive the next 6 hours. Reagan looked at Hartley. The old Marine was watching Brennan with an expression that mixed sympathy and assessment in equal measure. He's done, Reagan said quietly. His judgment is compromised. He needs sleep. Can't sleep during a defense, Hartley said. That's the lesson. The lesson is going to get him killed if we were doing this for real. But we're not. And sometimes the most important lesson is learning your limits. Reagan understood what Hartley was saying. This wasn't about Brennan succeeding. This was about Brennan understanding the gap between what he thought he could do and what he could actually do. That gap was where growth happened, or where people died, depending on whether they learned fast enough. Hour 20 brought a different kind of breaking point. Brennan sat down hard against a tree, not because he was taking a break, because his legs had stopped supporting him. Reagan watched him put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. She walked over, sat down beside him. Talk to me, Cole. He didn't look up. His voice was muffled by his hands. I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I've been pretending for so long that I forgot I was pretending. You finished the ruck march. You made it this far. That's not pretending. I finished because I refused to quit, not because I was good at it. There's a difference. Reagan was quiet for a moment. Yes, there is, and recognizing that difference is the first step toward actually becoming good. Brennan looked up. His eyes were red, exhausted. My whole life I've been trying to be my brother Ethan, Marine Raider, everything I wanted to be. I joined the Marines to honor my father's legacy. But I didn't know what that legacy actually was. I just knew he died and I needed to make it mean something. Your father's legacy isn't about being perfect. It's about surviving long enough to learn from your mistakes. How do you know? Because I saved his life in Kuwait, and the reason he needed saving was because he'd made a mistake. positioned his unit where friendly air support mistook them for enemy. That mistake should have killed him. Instead, it taught him. And he lived 2 more years because of it. Brennan was quiet, processing. I found a photo in his effects, a group of Marines in Kuwait. One face was blurred. There was a note on the back. Angel saved us. Never learned who she was. Reagan nodded. That was me. I was 17. Your father was 26. I held pressure on his chest wound for 40 minutes until medevac arrived. He survived because he was strong enough to endure the treatment and lucky enough to get help in time. And 33 years later, I shoved you in a mess hall and told you to go home. Yes, you did. Brennan's voice broke. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand. You couldn't have known. The operation was classified. I was never supposed to exist. Your father never knew who treated him. He just knew he survived. Master Gunn said his last words were, "Tell my son I tried to be brave." He felt shame about the friendly fire. Reagan's voice was firm. Your father didn't fail Cole. He survived friendly fire, got his men to cover, maintain security while wounded. That's not failure. That's heroism under the worst circumstances imaginable. She paused, let the words sink in. And now you get to decide what you do with that knowledge. You can let it break you or you can let it teach you. Your choice. Before Brennan could respond, a voice called from the edge of the patrol base. Cole. Reagan turned. A Marine in Raider uniform walked toward them. Late 20s. Same jawline as Cole, but with the relaxed confidence that came from having nothing left to prove. Ethan Brennan. He stopped in front of his brother, looked at Reagan. Petty Officer Frost. Captain Cole told me you're the operator who saved our father in Kuwait. Reagan stood, nodded. Corporal Brennan. Ethan turned to Cole. I got your message. About what happened, about what you've been learning. Cole met his brother's eyes. I've been trying to be you instead of being me. I know, that's why I'm here. Ethan's voice was firm, but not unkind. To tell you that you don't need to be me. You need to find out what Cole Brennan is actually good at, not what he thinks he should be. He glanced at Reagan. Sounds like you're getting a chance to learn from someone who can teach you. Don't waste it. Ethan extended his hand to Cole. They shook. Brothers separated by achievement, but connected by blood and the weight of a father neither had really known. Raiders isn't the only path to being a good Marine, Ethan said. Sometimes the best Marines are the ones who learn to teach instead of just fight. Think about it. He shook Reagan's hand, nodded to Hartley, then walked away, leaving his brother standing a little straighter. Cole looked at Reagan. He's right. I've been chasing his shadow instead of finding my own light. And then stop chasing. Start building. Hour 24 arrived with dawn breaking over North Carolina pine forest. The sky had decided not to rain after all. Just another empty threat from weather that understood the patrol base had endured worse than precipitation. Hartley called index. The evolution was complete. 4 Marines were still functional. Brennan was one of them, but barely. Hanging on through sheer stubborn refusal to quit, even though his decision-making had failed hours ago. 2 others had maintained adequate performance. 1 had excelled. Reagan looked ready to continue indefinitely. Like this was just a training exercise. Like she'd done this for 72 hours straight in places where the bullets were real and the consequences were permanent. Because she had. Hartley gathered the participants, told them to clean up, hydrate, get ready for formation in 2 hours. Everyone required to attend, no exceptions. The formation assembled at 1400 hours on the parade deck under a sun that had decided to make everyone pay for 3 days of cloud cover by turning the temperature into something that felt personal. Every participant stood in ranks, cleaned up but still carrying the exhaustion of 3 days without real rest. Behind them stood the rest of the company called to formation for reasons nobody had explained, but everyone suspected meant something significant was about to happen. Reagan stood in the back rank again, same position as 3 days ago, but something had changed. The Marines around her weren't treating her like a squid who didn't belong anymore. They were giving her space, respect, the kind that couldn't be demanded or awarded, only earned. Captain Cole stood at the front of the formation. Beside him stood Commander Julia Blackwell, 52 years old with iron gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and ribbons that told stories about places and operations that never made the news. Silver Star, multiple bronze stars with V device for valor, Purple Heart, and several ribbons that looked generic but meant something specific if you had clearances high enough to know what they really represented. Naval Special Warfare insignia, the SEAL Trident. Blackwell wore her authority quietly, didn't need to announce it. Just stood there and everyone knew she was someone who mattered. Cole addressed the formation. 3 days ago, I announced a leadership assessment. The results of that assessment will now be shared with the company. He paused, let the silence build like pressure before an explosion. Of the 10 participants, 4 maintained adequate performance throughout. 2 excelled. 4 failed to meet minimum standards in at least one critical evolution. He looked at Brennan. Corporal Brennan front and center. Brennan marched forward. His face was pale, but his back was straight. He'd showered and shaved, but his eyes still carried the exhaustion of 72 hours that had broken him down and shown him what he actually was instead of what he'd been pretending to be. Corporal Brennan, your performance during this assessment revealed significant deficiencies in tactical decision-making, leadership under stress, and physical endurance. However, it also revealed something more important. Cole's voice shifted, became less formal, more human. You finished, despite being broken down, despite making mistakes that would have gotten people killed in a real environment. You refused to quit. That's the foundation you build on. Everything else can be taught. Brennan nodded, said nothing, but something in his posture suggested relief mixed with determination. You're being reassigned to a training pipeline. 6 months. Combat instructor school followed by a billet at Paris Island. You'll learn how to teach before you try to lead again. Understood. Yes, sir. Good, but there's something you need to know first. Something about your father. Cole gestured to Hartley. The old Marine stepped forward, pulled a photograph from his pocket, the worn, faded image he'd carried for 33 years. Corporal Brennan, your father was Sergeant Marcus Brennan. Gulf War, friendly fire incident, January 29, 1991. Hartley held up the photograph. 6 Marines behind a burned-out M1 Abrams tank. Kuwait, night vision photography, grainy and greenish. This is your father, here third from the left, sucking chest wound from a 10 cannon fire. He should have died. He would have died, except for one person. Hartley pointed to a blurred figure in the background, kneeling beside a wounded Marine. This is the person who saved your father's life. She was 17 years old. He pulled out his phone, showed a digital version of the same photo, tapped the screen. The blur resolved into a face. Teenage Reagan Frost. Gray eyes, focused, treating a chest wound while 8 dead Iraqi soldiers cooled in the desert night around her. The formation went dead silent. Petty Officer First Class Reagan Frost, Hartley said. Call sign Angel, CIA asset. 8 confirmed kills that night. 30-plus Marines saved. Your father was one of them. Brennan stared at the photo, then at Reagan. His face cycled through disbelief, recognition, grief, gratitude. Your father lived 2 more years after Kuwait, Hartley continued. He came home. Your mother was 3 months pregnant. He got to know you were coming, got to prepare for your arrival. Then he died in a training accident 3 months after you were born, a vehicle rollover at 29 Palms. Hartley's voice was steady but carried weight. He never held you, never saw your face, but he knew you existed. And that knowledge, that hope, that future was a gift from the 17-year-old girl who held pressure on his chest wound for 40 minutes in the Kuwaiti desert while waiting for medevac that might never come. Brennan's legs were shaking. He looked at Reagan with an expression that held everything. Apology, gratitude, shame, understanding. His last words to me before he died, Hartley said, were, "Tell my son I tried to be brave." He carried shame about the friendly fire. Thought he'd failed because his positioning mistake led to the incident. But he survived, maintained security while wounded, got his men to cover. That's not failure, that's courage. Brennan walked over to Reagan, stood at attention. His voice was thick but clear. Petty Officer Frost, I formally apologize for my conduct. I assaulted you without provocation. I disrespected you without cause. I dishonored my father's legacy and my uniform. He paused, swallowed hard. I have no excuse. I can only ask for permission to earn back what I threw away. Permission to train under your instruction. To learn what real competence looks like. Reagan looked at him for a long moment, then spoke. Your father didn't fail, Cole, and neither did you. You just didn't know. Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is what matters. She extended her hand. Brennan shook it. Permission granted. Report to Quantico after you complete combat instructor school. You'll be in my first class. Thank you, ma'am. Commander Blackwell stepped forward. Her voice carried across the formation with the authority of 3 decades of naval special warfare operations. What you've just witnessed is the declassification of Operation Copper Fist, Gulf War 1991. The CIA Special Activities Division deployed a 17-year-old civilian asset with advanced sniper training to provide overwatch for Marine forces near the Kuwait border. She let that information sink in. A 17-year-old girl operating in a combat zone. The asset's call sign was Angel. 8 confirmed kills during a single engagement. 30-plus Marines saved from an Iraqi counterattack. 0 official recognition because the asset didn't officially exist. Blackwell looked directly at Reagan. After the Gulf War, the asset continued operating. Somalia 1993, Bosnia 1995, Kosovo 1999, Iraq 2004 through 2011, Afghanistan 2001 through 2021. At age 23, the asset was recruited into a classified program within JSOC, the Ghost Program. Murmurs rippled through the formation. The Ghost Program was legend, whispered about but never confirmed. Female operators who could access denied areas, who gathered intelligence where conventional assets failed. The Ghost Program currently has 12 female operators deployed worldwide. Blackwell continued. They embed with SEAL teams and Army Special Mission units. They provide intelligence support. They conduct direct action when required. They operate in places where their presence is never acknowledged and their work is never discussed. She paused. Let the weight settle. Petty Officer First Class Reagan Frost has spent 12 years attached to JSOC intelligence detachments. Call sign Angel 7. 43 confirmed missions in denied areas across 3 continents. 317 lives saved according to best estimates. 0 official recognition because she doesn't officially exist. The formation was absolutely silent. Every eye on Reagan. But Operation Desert Viper changed the calculus, Blackwell said. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 2021. A 4-person SEAL element and 1 Navy intelligence specialist were inserted to extract a high-value target with intelligence on an imminent large-scale attack against U.S. forces during the Kabul withdrawal. She described the mission. The 72 hours holding a compound against numerically superior militia forces. Limited ammunition, no air support, the kind of siege that should have ended with body bags and after-action reports about what went wrong. All 5 operators survived. The HVT was successfully extracted. The intelligence prevented an attack that would have killed over 200 American personnel during the evacuation operations. Blackwell's voice carried pride and sadness in equal measure. The SEAL team leader on that operation was Lieutenant Ash Sullivan. He was killed 8 months later in Ramadi, IE'd on a routine convoy. Before he died, he submitted a recommendation that Petty Officer Frost be transitioned from operational duties to instructor duties. She pulled out a piece of paper, read from it. Lieutenant Sullivan wrote, and I quote, Petty Officer Frost has given enough. She's carried the weight of operations that don't exist and paid the cost of survival that never gets acknowledged. Now let her teach others so they can give less and survive more. She's earned the right to stop being a weapon. Let her become a teacher. That's the harder mission and the one she's ready for. Reagan's jaw tightened. She hadn't known Sullivan had written that recommendation. Hadn't known his last official act had been trying to get her out of the fight. Blackwell turned to Reagan. Petty Officer Frost, I'm offering you permanent assignment as combat instructor at the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, Quantico, Virginia. You'll teach tactical movement, close quarters, combat casualty care, small unit leadership under stress. Everything you learn downrange, you'll pass forward to the next generation. Reagan's voice was steady when she spoke. What about the 12 operators still deployed, ma'am? Your cover has been adjusted through proper channels. They're safe. Your exposure here was controlled, declassified, official. But you're done operating. You've earned the right to stop. Reagan looked at Hartley. The old Marine nodded once. Permission and encouragement wrapped in a single gesture. I accept, ma'am, on one condition. Name it. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hartley co-teaches with me. We combine his 4 decades of experience with my 12 years of modern operations. Complete education across generational lines. Hartley straightened, looked surprised. Blackwell smiled for the first time. Master Guns, you planning to come out of retirement? Wasn't planning on it, ma'am, but if someone asks the right way, I suppose old habits die hard. Consider yourself recalled to active duty. 6 months a year at Quantico, starting next month. Blackwell dismissed the formation. The Marines scattered, but the participants remained. Brennan stood there holding the photograph of his father like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Staff Sergeant Hayes approached Reagan, extended his hand. Mogadishu, 1993, I never properly thanked you. Thank you for my life, ma'am. Thank you for every day I got after that market. Reagan shook his hand. Pass it forward, Sergeant. Teach others to survive. That's how you honor those 3 shots. Hayes nodded, walked away with purpose in his step. A 30-year debt acknowledged and transformed into mission. Hartley approached Reagan and Blackwell. We need to talk about Phoenix, he said quietly. Blackwell nodded. I've arranged transport. You leave tomorrow morning. Ghost Frost is having more bad days than good days now. The dementia is progressive. If you're going to see him while he still has lucid periods, it needs to be soon. Reagan's jaw tightened. How bad? Yesterday he thought it was 1987. This morning he had a lucid period, remembered everything. By afternoon he'd forgotten again. The windows are getting shorter. Does he know I'm coming? I called the facility this morning during his lucid period. He remembers you, remembers your career, asked if you'd figured out how to stop being a weapon yet. I told him you were working on it. Reagan nodded. Then we go tomorrow. The VIA hospital in Phoenix, set on the edge of the desert like a monument to the cost of service that outlasted the wars. Single-story buildings connected by covered walkways that provided shade from a sun that had stopped apologizing for the heat sometime around 1950. Reagan and Hartley arrived at 0800 hours. The air already carried the weight of a 100-degree day building toward 110. The receptionist directed them to room 247, long-term care wing. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner, fighting a losing battle against the particular odor of age and medical necessity. Hartley stopped outside the door. You ready? Reagan looked at the door like it was an enemy position she needed to breach. No, but that's never stopped me before. She pushed the door open. William Ghost Frost sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the desert that had shaped him and the daughter he'd trained to survive it. 79 years old. White hair, weathered skin, hands that trembled slightly from age and medication. He wore comfortable civilian clothes, nothing that suggested the legendary CIA operator who'd spent 4 decades in the shadows. He turned when they entered. His eyes were sharp, gray like Reagan's, still capable of measuring distances and calculating angles even if the targets had become memories instead of threats. Reagan, his voice was rough but steady, present. You came. She walked over to him, knelt beside his chair. Hi, Dad. Ghost reached out with a trembling hand, touched her face like he was confirming she was real, and not another trick the dementia played on quiet afternoons. You're real. Not a memory, not the confusion. Real. I'm real. He looked past her to Hartley. Declan, still keeping an eye on her. Always Ghost, like you asked. Ghost nodded, looked back at Reagan, studied her face. I read Hartley's reports. Everyone. 43 missions, 317 saves, 0 operational failures. You exceeded every expectation I ever had. You trained me well. I trained you to survive. You learned everything else yourself. His hand tightened on hers. Beirut took your mother, took 220 Marines, took part of me that never came back. I spent the rest of my life making sure it wouldn't take you. It didn't. No, you survived, thrived, became something better than I ever was, better than I deserved to build. Reagan pulled the letter from her pocket, the one Ghost had written 6 months ago on one of his good days. You told me to be a teacher, to pass it forward. I'm going to Quantico, combat instructor. Hartley's coming with me. Ghost smiled. First time his expression had shifted from evaluation to something warmer. Good, that's the mission I never finished. Teaching the next generation not to make the mistakes we made. He paused, his clarity flickering like a candle in wind. Did I do right by you, Reagan, training you the way I did, sending you to Kuwait at 17, making you into something that had to carry so much weight? Reagan's voice was firm. You did right, Dad. You taught me to survive. You gave me skills that saved hundreds of lives. You made me into someone who mattered. That's enough for one lifetime. Ghost's eyes were wet. Your mother would be proud. She always said the hardest wars were the ones fought with knowledge instead of bullets. She'd be proud you're teaching now. I wish I'd known her. She's in you. Every lesson you teach, every life you save through training instead of combat. That's her legacy too. His clarity started to fade. You could see it in his eyes. The present is slipping away. Other times bleeding through. Is it 1991, he asked. Do I need to prep you for Kuwait? No, Dad, it's 2024. Kuwait was 33 years ago. You're in Phoenix. You're safe. Reagan, my daughter Reagan. His voice was confused now, lost. You're 12. We need to practice windage. You already taught me windage, Dad. I remember everything. Hartley stepped forward, knelt beside Ghost's chair. Ghost, it's Declan. Remember Kuwait? You sent Reagan to save my life. She did. She saved 30 Marines that night. Ghost's eyes focused briefly, a moment of perfect clarity cutting through the fog. Declan? Kuwait, the friendly fire. He looked at Reagan. You saved them. Yes, Dad. Did I teach you right? Did the training hold? The training held. It's held for 33 years. Now I'm passing it forward. Ghost's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. Good, that's legacy. Not the kills, not the missions. The knowledge that keeps going after we're gone. His eyes closed. When he opened them, the fog was back. But he smiled one more time before the present slipped away completely. Legacy, he whispered. Pass it forward. A nurse entered, apologetic but professional. I'm sorry, he needs his medication. And he gets agitated when visitors stay during confused episodes. Reagan stood, kissed her father's forehead. I'll come back next week, Dad, and the week after, as often as I can. Ghost didn't respond. He was staring out at the desert, seeing something only he could see. Some other time. Some other war. Reagan and Hartley left the room, walked down the hallway in silence. Made it to the parking lot before Reagan's composure finally cracked. She sat on a bench in the shade of a mesquite tree. Let 33 years of forced separation and carried grief pour out in tears she'd been holding back since she was 17, and her father had staged his own death to protect her operational cover. Hartley sat beside her, didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes, just waited, present, solid. When Reagan finally stopped, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. He won't remember this tomorrow, will he? Probably not, but you'll visit again, get more moments. They'll be brief, but they'll be real. Is that enough? It has to be, because it's all anyone gets. Reagan pulled out a piece of paper and pen from her bag, started writing. What are you doing? Hartley asked. Writing him a letter. He might not remember receiving it, might not even be lucid when it arrives, but I'm writing it anyway. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat despite the emotion. Dad, I taught my first class will be in 2 weeks, 30 Marines, most younger than I was in Kuwait. They don't know what they don't know yet. You were right, teaching is harder than operating. When I operated, I controlled outcomes. When I teach, I give tools and hope they survive to use them. But this is the war that matters. The one you started and couldn't finish. I'll finish it for both of us. I'll win it by making sure the next generation survives without needing angels. Reagan. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, addressed it to Ghost at the VA hospital. He might not remember reading it, Hartley said. I know, but I'll remember writing it. And sometimes that's what matters. The conversation continues even when one person can't hear it anymore. They drove back to the airport. Reagan stared out the window at the Arizona desert, the landscape of her childhood, the place where Ghost Frost had taught her everything that mattered. Somewhere in this desert, she'd learned to field stirrup in a rifle blindfolded, learned to read wind and distance, learned that patience beats aggression and survival isn't enough if you don't pass it forward. Now she was going to teach those lessons to Marines who didn't know they needed them yet. 6 months later, Quantico, Virginia carried the particular quality of winter cold that made you remember why the Marines built their combat training facilities in places that tested you before the enemy ever got the chance. Reagan stood in front of 30 Lance Corporals in Training Bay 3. Behind her stood Hartley, 65, now 6 months into his return from retirement that wasn't really retirement anymore. In the front row sat Cole Brennan, 25. Graduated from combat instructor school 2 months ago. Transferred to Quantico specifically to learn from the person who'd saved his father's life and taught him what real competence looked like. I'm Reagan Frost, she said. Her voice carried across the training bay without effort. I've spent 12 years doing work I can't discuss in places I can't name. I'm here to teach you to survive, not to kill. Anyone can kill. Survival takes skill. She gestured to Hartley. This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Hartley. 46 years of service across 4 decades of warfare. Between us, we've seen everything that matters in combat. We're giving it to you. Hartley stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of experience earned through leading men who trusted him to keep them alive. Some of you will deploy, some won't. All of you will face the question at some point, am I a weapon or am I a warrior? He paused, let the question hang. Weapons break when the mission changes. Warriors adapt. We're teaching you to adapt, to think, to survive, not just the enemy, but the decisions that come after the bullets stop. Reagan's office held 3 photographs on the wall. First, Beirut, 1983. Young Ghost Frost pulling Marines from rubble through the barracks bombing that killed 220 Americans, including Reagan's mother. 2nd Kuwait 1991. 17-year-old Reagan and Sniper Hyde Hartley in background being evacuated by medevac the night that defined everything that came after. 3rd Quantico 6 months later. Reagan Hartley in their first graduating class. Brennan in the front row. 30 Marines who would carry forward the lessons learned in dark places so the next generation wouldn't have to learn them the same way. Captioned beneath in Reagan's handwriting, "Legacy isn't what you survive, it's what you pass forward." That evening, Reagan received a call from Phoenix 5 Hospital. "Ms. Frost, your father is having one of his good days. He's been asking for you." Reagan looked at the clock. 1700 hours. She could make a flight tonight, be in Phoenix by midnight. "Tell him I'm coming. I'll be there by morning." She drove to the airport, caught a red-eye to Phoenix, arrived at the VA hospital at 0600. Ghost was sitting by the window when she entered. The sunrise painted the desert in shades of orange and gold. He turned when she walked in. His eyes were clear, present. "Reagan, you came fast." "You called. I came." She sat beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Lucid, for now. The windows are getting shorter. Wanted to talk while I still could." He took her hand. "Tell me about Quantico, about the teaching." So she did. She told him about the 30 Lance Corporals learning tactical movement and combat casualty care, about Brennan's transformation from gym warrior to dedicated student, about the combination of Hartley's 4 decades and her 12 years creating something neither could build alone. Ghost listened to every word. His hand held hers with strength that surprised her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would be proud. She believed the hardest wars were fought with knowledge instead of bullets. She'd be proud you're fighting that war now." I wish I'd known her. "She's in every lesson you teach. Every Marine who survives because you train them right. That's her legacy. Yours too." His clarity started to fade, but he fought it, held on for one more moment. "Did I do right by you, Reagan?" She squeezed his hand. "You did right, Dad. You taught me to survive. Now I'm teaching others. The mission continues." Ghost's eyes closed. When he opened them, the fog was creeping back in, but he smiled. "Legacy," he whispered. "Pass it forward." Reagan stayed until visiting hours ended. She'd be back next week and the week after, storing up good moments while they lasted. Because that's what daughters did for fathers who'd given everything to make sure they survived. She flew back to Quantico that night. Tomorrow she had a class to teach. 30 Marines who needed to learn that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being smart enough to learn from people who'd survived what they hadn't faced yet. Reagan Frost had been a weapon for 12 years. Now she was a teacher. And in that transition, she'd found the mission that mattered most. Not the operations that never existed. Not the kills that were never acknowledged. The knowledge that kept going out to the warriors came home and the wars moved on. Legacy, that was everything.